All right, so what is it? grposh, September the 6th with WinSCP and PowerShell. So today's demo, we're going to give a little walkthrough of my Windows PowerShell module for WinSCP, which is just a WinSCP wrapper around the WinSCP.NET library. Let me open that a second. Sorry, I meant that. So WinSCP has a GUI for FTP, SCP, SFTP, which a lot of people use, but it's also got a really nice .NET library for it as well. It works like any other .NET library you wanted to use in PowerShell if you wanted to, which I'm going to give some examples of that. But their documentation is great. Everything is laid out. It's not really a big assembly. There's not a lot of stuff to it, but. And they actually do give a lot of C# examples and PowerShell examples as well for a few things. So I started using WinSCP, I don't know, 2.5 years ago, and I mean it works good, but I mean you can kind of see all the stuff you have to do when you're trying to do things. So you gotta add in the DLL so you can use it. You gotta build these objects, and then you gotta create a session object. Basically, you open the session object with this session options object. Okay. Sorry, I don't know what just happened. My mouse wheel decided that meant to go back. So yeah, anyway, it can do a lot, so I wanted to build some commandlets around it to make it, a little more PowerShell friendly, if you will. So anyway, we'll jump right into the examples, and then I kind of wanted to show a little bit on the framework of the module itself, how I have that built. But I figured we'd start with examples. All right. So anyway, I figured we'd run through a few basic tasks via the assembly first, and then I would show the PowerShell module equivalent. So anyway, let's get started. So very first thing that we need to do is add that DLL into the run space so it knows about all the classes and whatnot. After that, we build what's called a WinSCP.SessionOptions object. So that holds a lot of just the basic information, host name, credentials. It actually has a lot of options. So you can kind of see that in here. Like if I was going to try to reuse this code, and for example, I was using SFTP instead of FTP, then I'm going to need an SSH host key fingerprint. So I'd have to add that property, and it can get really in depth doing it this way. But anyway, we'll build this object in a minute. So this is basically going to connect to my computer. It's going to use FTP for a protocol, use anonymous for the username, and just an empty secure string for the secure password because it's anonymous authentication. So here's what that object looks like. So you can kind of see all of these properties in here can all be set when you're building this object. But we're not using most of them. Some of them have default values. So after that, we have to create a WinSCP session object, which this is the main class in WinSCP. Pretty much everything is executed on that. So the first thing we're going to do is actually build the class. Now I'm using my module to actually still do this stuff as far as using the DLL and the WinSCP.exe. So I don't keep them in the same folder. So by default, the DLL wants to look in its folder where it lives for the exe, and it's not. So here's one property I'm setting in this object so it knows where to find that. This also has a bunch of options too you can do as far as logging, debug logging. Yeah, so that, I mean, you can put all those in when you're creating your object. So here's what that object looks like. So you can kind of see some of these other properties, debug log path, stuff like that, XML log. So once you have a session object and session options object, You then call the open method on the session and use those session options for your argument so it knows what to do. Let's go ahead and run that. So now I'm actually connected to my FTP server on my local machine. I was going to start the server interface so you can see that. Let me do this second. This. Oops, sorry. I gotta create a new one because I disposed it. Now we'll open it. I connect over here. So now on the server, you can see that I connected to it with username anonymous. So you can just see that I'm connected. Kind of tells the current directory. So now we can actually perform options against the FTP server. So for example, I just have a few random files and folders created on this for example's sakes. So right here, I'm going to enumerate the, I'm going to perform this enumerate remote files method on it. It's going to use basically the root directory. This argument is for a file mask if I wanted to search for certain words and stuff like that. And this is a class out of the assembly to basically say, hey, don't just do files, also give me directories. Because the filter is null, it's going to essentially return everything. So you can see I got a few, FTP doc. You can see I have a few nested files too, I thought. Oh, sorry. You can see that on this one. So here's the same exact command, except this is, see, here's where it starts to get complicated. So this is the options you have to use to recursively search. So I run that same command. So now you can see here's one, its full name. See, when it's full name, it's actually recursed in one of those folders. So now let's actually do a file transfer. So first thing I'm going to do is just create a new file in temp, hello world, called new item.txt. Create a new item, and then we're going to use the put files method on the session object. So you have to specify what you're sending, the directory it's going. This true right here is a remove flag to remove the source files. And I'm going to do that because we're actually going to send the file back, and I don't want it to be there when we do that. So go ahead and send the file. You can see what it transferred and that it was a success. We can actually do get file info on the FTP server and see it's there. You can see here if I do get child item on the temp directory where we created it, it's gone. It'll return null. So now let's go ahead and receive that. So I just sent it back, and you can see there it was in the root directory. If we do a regular get item, there it is now in ctemp. And then let's just go ahead and delete that thing because we're done with it. And then when you're done, you just dispose of your object, and now it's gone. So that's kind of a basic overview of using the assembly to do things. So you can see, it's like any other .NET object. There's no commandlets for it. Everything is, methods on an object and all that good stuff. So I set out to try to make a module that would be a little more PowerShell friendly, so you can use it like you feel like you're in PowerShell. So we'll go ahead and basically do all the same stuff. It's just going to take way less commands, and they're going to make a lot more sense. So similar to adding an assembly, we need to import in the module. So go ahead and import in the WinSCP module, so you can do, get command module. You can see all the commandlets that has. So it kind of works the same way because it is just a wrapper over that assembly. So the first thing you got to do is create your session option object. And to do this, we're going to use new WinSCP session option. And we're going to do protocol FTP. I have a lot of defaults set up, so you don't have to specify that anonymous credential because it's going to use that by default unless you were to use the credential parameter. So then that's where you would pass your credential object to it. Go ahead and build that. Now, I want you to notice a couple things. I use what's called a format file to make objects a lot more readable, similar to how native PowerShell does. So if you remember when we actually got that session object before, there was like 50 properties on it, most of which just takes up space. So I've kind of been adding formats to make things look a little more readable. Sorry. I added it to the next one though. So anyway, we created our session object. Now we're going to go ahead and create new WinSCP session, which does both of the creating the session object and calling the open parameter on it. Open method on it. And then it passes your session option to that open method. Sorry, I hit F5. We'll get there. So there's the session now open, and here's kind of what I was talking about. Like, it gave that huge object about, you know, it's got like a built-in com command property they use, and just here's a little more useful information for it. You could still pipe that into select star. You get when. So there's that object. It just kind of cleans it up a little bit. Didn't remove anything. It's just what's being displayed. So when we did the enumerate the remote directory there, instead of having to even pass the root directory to it, I default it to that. So you can literally just call this. And also, if you notice, this is a lot more cleaner than the default view that was shown. If you actually look at this output, it looks exactly like get child item. You know what I'm saying? So I spent a lot of time trying to make these commandlets mimic native PowerShell commands. So here's your output of get WinSCP child item. Here's your output of get child item. So we can do the same thing and just call the recurse parameter. So that's the same thing as when we did that other long method on the other one. And it actually will group by directory. So here's, you know, your root directory. And here's that. Now, I do a lot of stuff under the hood to make that happen. So if we go back over here and say that same thing, even though the format file is loaded, it's still not going to like group them correctly. Oops. Sorry, I don't have a session object to show you that anymore. So now we can do the same thing. We'll create a new item in ctemp. And then you use send WinSCP item. You give it basically the local path. By default, it's going to use the root path, so you don't have to specify that. And here's that remove flag, which means I want you to remove the source file, so we'll remove it from ctemp. So there's the output, a little more cleaner. There's, you know, it just says it's success, the file that was transferred and the destination it went to. You can actually get the item so we can see that. Here's get child item. Oh, no, just to make sure it actually sent the file. That's from the ctemp, it's gone. So we'll receive it back. So there you can see it's in ctemp. And perform the get item, just like get WinSCP item. Output looks pretty much identical. Delete it now that we're done. That's pretty much it. Remove session, remove WinSCP session. So there's a few things happening under the hood in there too. I'm using default parameter values for the WinSCP session. So when you do this new WinSCP session, by default is what it's doing is it's setting the WinSCP session parameter of every other commandlet in the module to that value. Otherwise, you wouldn't have a handle to that object, and you'd have to call it all the time. So you'd have to do like, you know, session equals that, and then every time you called a commandlet, you'd have to say WinSCP session is session. So I tried to keep that a little simpler, and it's very, very particular. It only sets that parameter for functions that live inside of this module. Yeah, like. No, it is in the global scope because that's the only way to get out of the module into the user scope to be able to set it. But here, let me show you. When you say new WinSCP session, so what it's doing is it's down here a little more. So it does get command, looks at the module WinSCP, and then only grabs commands that have the parameter WinSCP session, and then it binds the default parameter values for that. And then when you say remove WinSCP session, it restrips that back down too. So it's not doing like a clear your whole scope or any of that. So I think it's a very good usage of setting default parameter values, because usually I don't see a good way to do that in the global scope anyway. Right. And it could get scary doing things like identity. So like, it's maybe used identity in your module, but you also had the AD module loaded, and then you are automatically setting all the identity parameters anytime you called that. So at least this way, it's very particular setting the exact, you know what I mean? It's for the only way this would mess up is if you had another module called WinSCP. So, well, you could do it. You just have to call everything by full path. So like it's kind of the same thing. You can have like a get item commandlet. You would just have to call it by full path. Sometimes I know one in particular is the package management module. When you look in there, you reuse commandlet names that are default. So you'll see all their full paths to it. It's like module name / commandlet name, and then the parameter values. So with that, I wanted to lead into some of the things that I've done with the actual structure of this commandlet. Of this module. So when you look at, let me go to my documents here. So kind of here's like the root of the project. So I just found out a couple things with this today, and I'm super excited about it. So I used to handwrite all of my help that was on the interwebs. So if you go to .ps1/WinSCP. So this is like all handwritten. All of these commandlets, I literally took the time to go through and write and do all these code blocks and, add all these links, and it's great, but I refactored this whole entire module. And for me to go through and take the time to do that, I'd have to update every example, everything. It's just not feasible. I just don't have the time to do it. So I dropped the money and bought Sapiens commandlet help, our commandlet help writer, for 49 bucks. And it's pretty slick. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but basically you create a project and you import in your module, and it will strip apart your module, and it will find as much out about it as it can. So like here, let's look at one of the modules we were actually using, like get WinSCP child item. So it actually takes the code, strips it apart, very similar to like how PlatyPS works. And it builds all your parameters for you. It puts the types, it puts if they're named, you know what I mean, if they're required. You have to use parameter attributes for that, obviously, in your code, which you should be doing. But so basically it takes, so it's going to go through and look at like this kind of stuff and go, okay, this is mandatory. So then it goes through and marks it as mandatory. You know what I mean? And I said, okay, value from pipeline only. Well, value from pipeline only. And that's why it's not changeable, because it's actually in the code. So then there's only a few stuff that you really need to worry about filling out yourself. Namely, description, synopsis, and obviously I can't tell what it's doing. And then usually the examples you got to create yourself. And I love these little GUIs for doing it. Like it's, you know what I mean? You can just copy and paste code in there, and it renders exactly how it looks. Spaces, all that kind of stuff. So you go through and do that to all your commandlets, and then you can just spit out that super complex XML that you see. So I don't know if you've ever seen an XML help file, but it's literally 5,000 lines of XML. So this replaces all the comment-based help. But this also leads to updatable help. So when you want to create, if you want to have your module just so you can keep updating your help without having to redeploy your code, you can make that happen this way. So here's kind of how the structure of that looks then. Yeah, and Markdown, and that's the best part. So here's my GitHub repository. So I got a few things in here, README, some of my build stuff, my tests. That's the last thing on my list before this release is finalized, is I need to get my tests rebuilt, because I redid all the code. I'm sure all my tests fail. So here's my actual deployed module, and here's how it looks. So in the bin file, there's my WinSCP.exe. This is in here by creation, but it's ignored in my commits. So my git nor, this where my builds come from. So this holds information, not really important information, but information about my computer. So that's, you don't obviously want that in your build. You want that excluded, but it's auto-generated as soon as you run the exe. So in here you would have this per every language if you wanted to support multiple languages. But in here is where that XML file goes. So you can actually say from Sapiens Help Writer where to deploy this to. So it actually built this in here for me. And I also created this about WinSCP help.txt. And these names are extremely important. If these names are not in this exact format, PowerShell won't see it when you try doing things like this. So you can actually say get help about _ WinSCP. And there is just like a generic overview of the entire module. And if you don't have that file worded right and in the right location, that won't work. And that's just a plain text file, but anyway. So the last part of that help stuff that I wanted to talk about is what Micah had just saw in this commandlet to markdown. So you can actually say, oops, sorry, it's this one, file to markdown. So you can say individual markdown files. Now here's the coolest part that I just found today. So instead of me typing those commandlets out all the time, I can keep it edited in here. And then I found out on GitHub, if you actually go to one of your repositories, we'll do this one, and you go to the wiki, let me just create a page in here, I don't really care. If you look right here after you create your first page, your wiki is actually a separate GitHub repository. So that's freaking awesome. So what I did is I just created a folder in here called wiki, and then I just exported all those markdown files to it. And the coolest part is I can keep the source files in there as well, but none of them are rendered. So I can create or keep all of these Sapien files that it wants for whatever reason in here as well for creating the help. But then if you actually go to WinSCP and go to the wiki, there's all those markdown files. And this is what it literally looks like auto-generated. I didn't type any of that. Not in Markdown. All I had to do it was in Sapiens Help Writer. But then I can create web-based help, I can create XML-based help, and I can keep source control on it. So, and the best part is, that I love this part right here. So if you, in your code, put that URL right here, for the help URI, not only, so you can do this, you can say get help, get WinSCP child item. So there's the XML based help that I typed right. You can do examples. There's my examples that I typed out. Or what Micah just said, the best part, you can do online, and it literally opens up that web page. That is awesome. So that's going to become my new, way of help. So that static web page, that Jekyll web page, I don't ever have to touch that again. And I did like it at first, but I couldn't come up with a good way to, I guess I could just have exported those MB files to it, but I think it'd want dates and stuff in front of them, and you need front page YAML matter and all that. So I think that's pretty much all that I really wanted to get into in the module design. Like I said, so now my projects will have 2 repos for the actual source code and then the wiki. And here's my actual deliverable in there. Oh, here's where the DLL resides too, in the lib file there. So, yeah. That's pretty much my little spiel. Any questions or anything? Oh, of the format file? Yeah, sure. So the easiest way I found to do is go into your, go into like, System32, PowerShell, V1, look at some of the default ones and just steal one and then just start editing it. Don't edit it in place because it'll screw up your default objects. But so yeah, and then you just name it module name.format.ps1xml. So it's basically, let me see if, oh, I thought there was regions in here where I could kind of show one object. Let me get rid of this. So basically this is the root node, you know, and then you're going to create a view for each object type, and that's how you classify it. So like right here, you're going to say, I want a view selected by whatever type name. So you could inject a type into existing ones if you wanted to override it into existing objects. And then it's got a few, it doesn't really have a lot of stuff, but you know, it's got a group by, which is where you saw that directory when it was grouping all the objects by the directory. And you can use script blocks in here. And anytime you want to reference the object, it's just like it's coming through the pipeline. So it's going to be $underbar. And then after that, there's like table by, there's like a table control and a list control, I think. So here you can see I'm doing a table control, and you know what I mean, I'm laying out all the headers. And this is where it gets lame, like, you know what I mean, that's static, like, and I literally stole this from built-in one. So if you say like get child item and you see that mode at the right side with all the different, you know, permissions and stuff on it, it's literally set to 9 characters. Yeah, so, I mean, and then, so basically you're going to define all your table headers, and then in those table headers you define the properties you want. If it's just got a property you want, it's no problem, property name. But like in this one, you know, like, so here's a script block. So if it's a directory, I want you to not say the length of it, which is really the size, because there is no size of that folder. I mean, it's, you only want that on the files. So just ran that's pretty much the gist of that, and then you can just do multiple views. And you can actually have multiple views inside a view. So the default one's going to be the one you want, but then I forget how you do it. You can say like format table or whatever, and then you can actually say the name of the view, and if the object has that name, it will use that view. So the default view is what you get no matter what, but yeah, so you can actually have multiple views for a given object. I thought I actually did a list one in here, but no, they're all tables. Yeah, they're all table controls. So anyway, that's a format file, a very not elaborate one. I'm only formatting like 3 or 4 object types. So yeah, I think that's about it. Anything else? Yeah, no more. All right, well, thanks.